We are back to finish up part 1 of Fahrenheit 451. Today we are going to be doing pages 78 through 83 because that's where part 1 ends. So let's get started. Montag watched through the window as Beatty drove away in his gleaming, yellow flame-colored Beetle with the black, char-colored tires. Across the street and down the way, the other houses stood with their flat fronts. What was it Clarice had said one afternoon? No front porches. My uncle says there used to be front porches, and people sat there sometimes at night talking when they wanted to talk, rocking, and not talking when they didn't want to talk. Sometimes they just sat there and thought about things, turned things over. My uncle says the architects got rid of the front porches because they didn't look well, but my uncle says I was merely rationalizing it. The real reason, hidden underneath, might be that they didn't want people sitting like that, doing nothing, rocking, talking. That was the wrong kind of social life. People talked too much. They had time to think, so they ran off with the porches and the gardens too. Not many gardens anymore to sit around in, and look at the furniture. No rocking chairs anymore. They're too comfortable. Get people up and running around. My uncle says, and my uncle, and my uncle. Her voice faded. We are going to come to our notes and add that in here as our notes. We're going to add this in the form of a question. What is the reason that there are no more porches? Clarice kind of answered that already. But that is one question that we are going to be coming back to, so we want to mark it down because it really kind of wraps up a lot of the ideas behind this book into one neat little question. So we want to make sure that we keep that in mind and don't lose that, so that when it gets around to the test time, we already have that one down and we remember the answer to it. Montag turned and looked at his wife, who sat in the middle of the parlor talking to an announcer, who in turn was talking to her. "Mrs. Montag," he was saying. This, that, and the other. "Mrs. Montag," something else, and still another. The converter attachment, which had cost them $100, automatically supplied her name whenever the announcement addressed his anonymous audience, leaving a blank where the proper syllables could be filled in. A special spot Wavix scrambler also caused a televised image in the area immediately about the lips to mouth the vowels and consonants beautifully. He was a friend, no doubt of it, a good friend. "Mrs. Montag, now look right here." Her head turned, though she quite obviously was not listening. Montag said, "It's only a step from not going to work today to not working tomorrow to not working at the firehouse ever again." "You are going to work tonight, though, aren't you?" said Mildred. "I haven't decided. Right now I've got an awful feeling I want to smash things and kill things." "Go take the Beetle." "No, thanks. The keys to the Beetle are on the night table. I always like to drive fast when I feel that way. You get up around 95 and you feel wonderful. Sometimes I drive all night and come back and you don't know it. It's fun out in the country. You hit rabbits, sometimes you hit dogs. Go take the Beetle." Again, here is this idea that Mrs. Montag has that reflects kind of the rest of society. Hurting things, that killing things is just something fun to pass the time because, after all, they're just things. They're just there for your own enjoyment. So it's very cruel, very sadistic. Whereas Montag Guy is feeling this way because he is dealing with his displaced anger. He feels so frustrated and stressed about the society that's around him, and he can't do anything about it, so he just wants to lash out at whatever's nearest. This is actually a very important concept with psychology, and it explains a lot about why people behave the way that they behave. So let's go ahead and mark this down in our vocab section, even though it hasn't come up as an actual vocabulary word in the story. It's really, really important. Displaced anger. When you are so upset but can't address what is upsetting you, so You just want to lash out at whatever is near. A very, very important concept with psychology. Next time somebody's yelling at you and you don't know what you've done wrong to cause them to be so upset, think about this. It's probably not you that they're actually angry with. They're just lashing out because you're a convenient target. It's not nice, but it is the way that we and most animals work. No, I don't want to this time. I want to hold on to this funny thing. God, it's gotten big on me. I don't know what it is. I'm so damn unhappy. I'm so mad and I don't know why. I feel like I'm putting on weight. I feel fat. I feel like I've been saving up a lot of things and I don't know what. I might even start reading books. Well, they'd put you in jail, wouldn't they? She looked at him as if he were behind the glass wall. He began to put on his clothes, moving restlessly about the bedroom. Yes, and it might be a good idea before I hurt someone. Did you hear Beatty? Did you listen to him? He knows all the answers. He's right. Happiness is important. Fun is everything. And yet I kept sitting there saying to myself, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. I am, Mildred's mouth beamed, and proud of it. Again, here is Mildred taking what's wrong with Montag and making it all about herself. I'm going to do something, said Montag. I don't even know what yet, but I'm going to do something big. I'm tired of listening to this junk, said Mildred, turning from him to the announcer again. Montag touched the volume control on the wall, and the announcer was speechless. Millie, he said, this is your house as well as mine. I feel it's only fair that I tell you something now. I should have told you before, but I wasn't even admitting it to myself. I have something I want you to see. Something I put away and hid during the past year. Now and again, once in a while, I didn't know why, but I did it and I never told you. He took hold of a straight-backed chair and moved it slowly and steadily into the hall near the front door and climbed up on it and stood for a moment like a statue on a pedestal, his wife standing under him, waiting. Then he reached up and pulled back the grill of the air conditioning system and reached far back inside to the right and moved still another sliding sheet of metal and took out a book. Without looking at it, he dropped it to the floor. He put his hand back up and took out two books and moved his hand down and dropped the two books to the floor. He kept moving his hand and dropping books, small ones, fairly large ones, yellow, red, green ones. When he was done, he looked down upon some 20 books lying at his wife's feet. Let's add this here into our key events. It's not only that Montag has been stealing books, but he's been stealing a lot of books. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't really think. But now it looks as if we're in this together. Mildred backed away as if she were suddenly confronted by a pack of mice that had come up out of the floor. He could hear her breathing rapidly, and her face was paled out, and her eyes were fastened wide. She said his name over, twice, 3 times. Then, moaning, she ran forward, seized a book, and ran toward the kitchen incinerator. He caught her, shrieking. He held her, and she tried to fight away from him, scratching. No, Millie, no, wait, stop it, will you? You don't know. Stop it. He slapped her face. He grabbed her again and shook her. She said his name and began to cry. Millie, he said, listen. Give me a second, will you? We can't do anything. We can't burn these. I want to look at them. At least look at them once. Then if what the captain says is true, we'll burn them together. Believe me, we'll burn them together. You must help me. He looked down into her face and took hold of her chin and held her firmly. He was looking not only at her, but for himself and what he must do in her face. Whether we like this or not, we're in it. I've never asked much from you in all these years, but I ask it now. I plead for it. We've got to start somewhere. Figuring out why we're in such a mess. You and the medicine nights and the car and me and my work. We're headed right for the cliff, Millie. God, I don't want to go over. This isn't going to be easy. We haven't anything to go on, but maybe we can piece it out and figure it and help each other. I need you so much right now. I can't tell you. If you love me at all, you'll put up with this 24 hours 48 hours, that's all I ask. And then it'll be over, I promise, I swear. And if there's something here, just one little thing out of this whole mess of things, maybe we can pass it on to someone else. She wasn't fighting anymore, so we let her go. She sagged away from him and slid down the wall and sat on the floor looking at the books. Her foot touched one, and she saw this and pulled her foot away. That woman the other night, Millie, you weren't there. You didn't see her face. And Clarice, you never talked to her. I talked to her. And men like Beatty are afraid of her. I can't understand it. Why should they be so afraid of someone like her? But I kept putting her alongside the firemen in the house last night, and I suddenly realized I didn't like them at all, and I didn't like myself at all anymore. And I thought maybe it would be best if the firemen themselves were burnt. Guy! The front door called softly. Mrs. Montag. Mrs. Montag. Someone here. Someone here. Mrs. Montag. Mrs. Montag. Someone here. Softly. They turned to stare at the door, and the books toppled everywhere in heaps. Beatty, said Mildred. It can't be him. He's come back, she whispered. The front door voice called again softly. Someone here. We won't answer. Montag lay back against the wall and then slowly sank into a crouching position and began to nudge the books, bewilderedly with his thumb, his forefinger. He was shivering, and he wanted above all to shove the books up through the ventilator again, but he knew he could not face Beatty again. He crouched, and then he sat, and the voice in the front door spoke again, more insistently. Montag picked up a single, small volume from the floor. Where do we begin? He opened the book halfway and peered at us. We begin by beginning, I guess. He'll come in, said Mildred, and burn us and the books. The front door voice faded at last. There was a silence. Montag felt the presence of someone beyond the door, waiting, listening, and footsteps going away down the walk and over the lawn. Let's see what this is, said Montag. He spoke the words haltingly and with terrible self-consciousness. He read a dozen pages here or there and came at last to this. It is computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. Mildred sat across the hall from him. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. The captain was right. Here now, said Montag. Start over at the beginning. This is where the chapter ends. So section 1 is over. On to section 2, the sieve and the sand. Before we move on to section 2, let's go back to our notes here and add. Someone has come to the door, and Montag begins reading a book. Add this question here. What is the significance of the passage? And this is the question. This is the important part. I would like you to try to answer this question. Who is right? I or Mildred? Mildred wants to turn Guy in. She's been told since she was born that books are bad. You should not have books. If you see somebody with books, you're supposed to turn them in. You're supposed to call the police, call the fire department so they can deal with it. People with books are dangerous. So she believes that is what you should do. You should go after things that make you happy. Don't make waves. Don't cause trouble. Guy, however, believes that maybe there is something to books. Maybe there is a reason that somebody would be willing to burn alive rather than live without them. He believes that maybe there is such a thing as necessary trouble. Who is right? So what I want you to do for this part, since we are at the end of part 1, is write a paragraph answering this and explaining your answer. We'll come back and read part 2.